How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Web Dev Junkie. My name is Cody Seibert, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build a really small horoscope app using React. We're not using Redux. We're not using like any other React router. It's just a really simple app where basically it displays all the horoscope signs, so all 12 of them. The user can click one, and then we can click a time frame, so like today, yesterday, tomorrow, and that does a REST call to get back your horoscope for that sign and that time frame. And there's a restart button to go back to the initial state if for whatever reason you clicked the wrong time frame or sign, etc. So it's a really small app, but I think it's a good app, like a good bite-sized app where if you're new at learning React or building web applications, it's a good tutorial to follow. So let's go ahead and get started and start looking at the code. So for this horoscope project slash app, I went ahead and used create react app to build up a project structure. And if you don't know what that is, it's a command line tool you can run to kind of just set up the initial React project. Because there's a lot of stuff you have to do behind the scenes. So everything is set up, ready to go, and the main entry point to our app is app.js. And after you ran create react app, you could do yarn start, and that will host a service that's hosting your React app on port 3000. So that's what we got here. So to start building out this application, what do we want to do? Well, we need to render out the 12 signs that are used in horoscopes to kind of display them as buttons onto the page. So in React, you can typically map over arrays. So if I had like an array of A, B, and C, I could just simply map over those and print out, we'll pretend those are signs. And for each one, let's just render out a button that has some text inside of the button. So if I save this, we should see 3 buttons on the screen that says A, B, and C. And React's going to give a warning because you need to put a key property on those buttons. So let's just do that really quick before we forget about it. So they have a unique identifier and we don't get those warnings. So in order to list out the 12 horoscope signs, obviously we could hard code those, but we do have a REST API. If I could find it, I guess I can go to my history. It just had it opened. Here we go. So there's a free REST API that kind of gives you a horoscope for yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And it also has an endpoint for getting the sun signs. So if I click on this link, this REST endpoint will give me back an array of all the different signs. So let's just go ahead and try to use this in our app to make it a little bit more interesting versus just hard coding our signs here. So again, what do we need to do? Well, when this app first mounts, we need to request some data from that REST API, right? So using hooks, there is a hook called useEffect, which you can use for when your component first mounts. So I'm going to actually use that. So useEffect is going to call something, and I'm going to pass it an empty array. Now this empty array means that this is only going to run once when the component is like mounted. If you forget to do this, if you forget to add this empty array, you can run into issues where like you infinitely keep fetching the API and setting the state results, and it just keeps on doing that over and over again. And I just ran into that and it crashed my Chrome. So make sure you have that empty array here so it only runs once. But anyway, what we want to do is we want to fetch the sun signs from this URL. So using a library called fetch, which is built into your browser, you should be able to hit that endpoint. And that's going to return you a promise. So you need to take the response of that and kind of call the JSON object on it to be able to get the raw array value from that endpoint. And at this point, we don't have a way to kind of like render this onto the page because we don't have like any state, okay? So another hook we're going to bring in is called useState. And this is a hook, a method that you call and you pass it the initial state that you want, and it returns you an array. Okay, so that array has 2 elements. The first index is going to be pretty much your variable or your state variable. So I can call that signs. And your second index is going to be a method you can use to set the first variable, right? So I'm going to say set signs. Now, after we call this fetch method and we got the JSON response, we can just promise chain that set signs method And we should be able to update this signs variable when the request is finished. So the last part is, let's just go ahead and map over those and print out some buttons. And we'll go back and notice that our API, our app, I mean, has all 12 of those signs printing out. And if I go to my network tab and type sun signs, notice that it actually made a request to that endpoint. And we got back some data. So let's add a couple of things to this app to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So I'm going to say the Horoscope app. I'll maybe put an H2 and say like, please select a sign. And I want to go ahead and make the background color black and the text color white. Cool. So another thing I want to do is, this is really like not really user friendly. The buttons are teeny, the font's small, and they're all in one line. So I'm going to put this in a CSS grid with 3 columns. So inside of index CSS, or I guess technically I could put it in app CSS, I'm going to make a grid class that has a display of type grid, and I think there's a property called grid template columns, where if I put one FR 3 times, that's going to make pretty much a grid with 3 columns. And then grid gap is kind of important to just space the elements out. So now we can use that grid class here to kind of space out all those buttons so they look a little bit more pleasing to the eye. So, okay, this is a step in the right direction, I think. But now the buttons are teeny. Now I like to style those. So I'm going to go ahead and add a class name of sign to the buttons. And I'm going to go ahead and just add, like, I don't know, some padding to it. Make the font bigger. Yikes, that's a little too big. Oh, probably give it like a cursor pointer. It is a button, so I don't know why I have to give it a cursor pointer. Must be something wrong. Like, there's no hover state, although these are buttons. Anyway, if you know the answer, feel free to leave a comment. So now at this point, when a user clicks on one of these buttons, we want to actually set some state to remember, like, okay, what sign did the user click on? So going back to our app component, what we could do is we can make another use state call, and we can keep track of just the string of what sign is selected. So I'm going to say selected sign, and the second index of the array is going to be set selected sign. And so when a user clicks on one of these buttons, we just want to update that selected sign here. So I can say on click on the button, we could say set selected sign of sign. And now if I were to render out selected sign, it should update as I'm clicking things. Cool. So I'm not a big fan of how, like, we're just tacking a bunch of stuff onto the app.js. What makes it a little bit more useful is, first of all, if this stuff existed in an API, kind of like a service class. So I'm going to go ahead and make a file called service, or a folder called service. And inside that, I'm going to make a file called API. And what that is going to do is basically run this command. Let's just pretend there's a method called getSigns that returns your signs, and you could do your promise chaining stuff here. And since we're pretending that we have a method called getSigns, let's just also import it from our service/API file. And we haven't actually created that yet, so let's do that. So inside our API, let's export a getSigns method, which is going to basically return that same code. And this helps kind of clean up our code and keep our API isolated from our actual, like, React components. Just a little bit cleaner approach, I guess. Not that big of a deal. And the second thing you notice is that it would be nice if, like, the stuff related to selecting a sign was in its own component. So I'm going to go ahead and make another folder called components. I'm going to make a JSX file called select sign.jsx. And that's going to export a function, which takes in, right now, it's just going to take in one argument called set selected sign. Or maybe I should say on selected sign. On sign selected. How about that? Anyway. So if we were to take the HTML, starting at the H2 down to the div, and just go ahead and cut that out and put it directly into the return statement of this component. Make sure you use these fragments or else it's going to complain. We could import that. So select sign. So import that component. Let's see, auto import from components. Yep. And it's going to have a property called on sign selected. And what we want to do is we want to call set selected sign here. And all this sign logic could just pretty much live inside of this select sign component, okay? So that it doesn't need to be kind of in our main app. So let me just go ahead and we could cut this out because that's no longer used. And we need to also use React and use effects and use state and stuff like that. All right, so assuming we did this all correctly, now let me just put that back so we can actually make sure we did it correctly. Cannot resolve service API. I think I need to go up a level. In fact, I'm going to call that services because service is kind of singular and that doesn't seem right. Services / API. Cannot resolve that. Why can I not resolve that? I think I actually need to import the JSX here maybe. So inside of select sign component, it says it cannot resolve get signs. Export const get signs. What am I doing wrong? Okay, it's working now. That was strange. So everything's working as it was before. I click on the things. But the main difference is we kind of abstracted a lot of that select sign stuff and put it in its own component just to kind of simplify the main app. So let's move on to the next part, which is when you select the sign, we want to hide all this stuff and prompt the user to select a day. Okay, so let's make another component called select timeframe. So select timeframe JSX. And that's going to export a select timeframe component, functional component. And we got to make sure we include all this React stuff. And it's going to be kind of similar to this one. So let's just go ahead and copy this code out and paste it here. So please select a time frame. And what we're going to do here is just print out yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Okay, so they can select one of the following time frames. And this is going to be pretty much identical to the other one. So on time frame selected. And that's going to be a property that's passed in. And we don't need effect or state here, so I'll get rid of that stuff. So now in our app component, we could just say render select time frame. And on time frame selected is a property we need to pass in. And we don't actually have a state for the time frame, so let's make one. So I'll say selected time frame. Set selected time frame. All right, so I'll make sure I'll pass that one in now. And it's complaining because I haven't imported it yet, so I'll auto import it up here. And okay, so the only problem now is that it displays the sign stuff and the time frame stuff at the same time, and we want to just logically show one or the other. So in React, one approach you can do is basically say only render select sign if the selected sign state has not been set yet. So I'm going to do some logic like that. And then I'll say only show this one if we have selected a sign. Okay, so now once we select one, it'll go to please select the time frame. And we're not using React Router, so we can't really go back to the other state. It's not that big of a deal. We're going to fix that in a second. Actually, we could do that now. So let's say you clicked on the wrong thing. Let's say that there's a way to go back. So let's just add a button called restart. And when you click it, it's going to call a restart method. And what we could do is when you call restart, just basically set both of these back to null. So I'm going to call the states set selected sign back to null. And I will call set selected time frame back to null as well. So now when I click this, it'll go back to the initial state that we had. Just kind of a little hacky way to go back to the start. All right, so now what we want to do is that there's another endpoint where you can grab those horoscopes based on the sign you passed in. So if you look at here, you can call this endpoint and pass it your sun sign with today, tomorrow, or yesterday as your final token. And that'll return you an object that has your horoscope in it. So let me change this to like Cancer or something. And that'll return you back an object that has a horoscope property on it. And this is kind of what we want to display in our app when we have selected our sign and we've selected our time frame. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in and select the sign. And then when we click yesterday, today, or tomorrow, we're going to keep track of what time frame they selected. So that should be here. And once they've selected a time frame, we could probably just display the horoscope, right? So let's pretend we have a horoscope component, and that's going to take in the sign as a property. So I'll say selected sign. And it's going to take in the time frame. So we could pass it selected time frame. And that's basically going to do that fetch request from our API and display that horoscope. So I'm going to make a new component called horoscope JSX, which is a function that takes in, again, sign and time frame. Right now, I'll just render out like a div that says hi. So let's auto import this here. And basically, if you have the sign selected and you have a selected time frame, then you display the horoscope. It's complaining, saying that React is not part of this. So let's import React up here. All right, so if I select a sign and select a time frame, notice that it's still displaying this, which is not good. So if you selected a sign and you haven't selected a time frame, then display that stuff. So let's redo that. Okay. So now we're kind of almost on the last step here. So what we want to do is we want to basically in our API, we can add a new method called get horoscope, which takes in a sign and a time frame. And we want to call whatever the endpoint was. So it's horoscope is this. So as long as we call that API with the sign and the time frame and the URL, we should get back the expected results here. Let's see. I'm just going to add this little piece here because remember the JSON that's returned has horoscope as a property. So I just want to return that string back. So whenever someone calls this API get horoscope method, we just get back a string and that's it. Okay, so similar to the select sign, we need to do an effect to get back the horoscope and then a state to actually keep track of it. So I'm going to go ahead and import those two hooks. So use effect and use state. And I'm going to go ahead and make a state variable called a horoscope and set horoscope. I'm going to call get horoscope, pass it sign and time frame, and then pass it set horoscope. And technically we want this to redo its effect whenever sign or time frame changes. So I'm just going to get rid of that empty. Well, I guess it added it back for me, which is convenient. And then all you got to do is just render out the horoscope here. All right, so if everything went according to plan, if I click on, let's say, Capricorn and click on today, notice that it prints out the horoscope for all that. And before I go any further, I want to go ahead and just print out like a little title here that says your horoscope for sign. I'll say time frame. So like today, your horoscope for whatever is dot dot dot. Probably wrap this in a paragraph tag. Click some stuff. Let's see. Cool. And that, I mean, obviously you could do a lot of styling to fix this stuff up and make this look nice. You could add icons or images for every sign. And you could use a React router to actually keep track and be able to use the back button when they click different signs and whatnot. But for the sake of this tutorial, I think that kind of covers a lot of just like building a really simple horoscope app. Not the prettiest app in the world, but I think we covered a lot of different topics in terms of creating a really simple React app. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns of this video, feel free to leave a comment below. Otherwise, again, you've watched Web Dev Junkie. My name is Cody Seibert, and thank you so much for watching. This code is posted on my GitHub repo, which will be in the description below. Have a good day.